Hello, everyone. Thanks for being here. I'm just going to give it maybe another minute or two. I can see some more people coming in before we get started. So this is our first episode of the Unfiltered Dose, which is going to be like an ongoing webinar series, talking about different, ways that you can bring up the quality of your life through health and wellness. My name is Calvin, and I'm actually really excited to be the moderator for today's webinar on natural mood support during the darker winter months. Like I said, this is our first webinar in our new series, the Unfiltered Dose. I want to thank you all for taking the time to join us, whether you're here live or tuning in later. We're excited to share some valuable insights that can genuinely make a difference in how you feel this season. As many of us know, winter can be challenging. There's shorter days, reduced sunlight, and colder weather, which can affect our mood, motivation, and energy. So today's session is all about cutting through the noise and giving you a clear, practical, evidence-informed strategies to support your mental wellness naturally. And we're incredibly fortunate to have Dr. Paul Hrkal, ND, here to guide us. Dr. Hrkal is a naturopathic doctor with a clinical focus in neurological health, chronic pain, and brain injuries. He's delivered more than 100 webinars, podcasts, and live presentations, so I wouldn't be surprised if you've seen him out there before, oftentimes educating both medical professionals and public audiences on brain health and integrative approaches to wellness. He serves as a scientific advisory board for Complete Concussion Management, which is a global leader in research-based concussion education. And he's also the co-founder of the Concussion Fix program, which provides comprehensive support for individuals recovering from brain injuries. So if you know someone or you yourself are having a tough time post-concussion, I highly recommend the Concussion Fix program. Dr. Hrkal is also part of the team at the Pain and Wellness Center, where he contributes to an ongoing Ontario Ministry of Health-funded study on multidisciplinary pain management. Beyond the clinical work, he has nearly a decade of experience in the natural health industry as a scientific advisor and medical director, helping clinicians understand the science behind supplementation and contributing to the formulation of several best-selling products. We're also proud to have him as the scientific advisor for Aqua Omega. You can follow him on Instagram, Dr. Paul Hrkal, or his website, paulhrkalnd.com. So with that, Paul Hrkal is here. We can maybe just jump in. Also, if you have any questions, we'd really like this, Unfiltered Dose webinar to be interactive. So I've already got a bunch of your questions through Instagram. I'll be sure to go through those. And if you have any, feel free to ask them in chat. And at the end, I'll be sure to go over them with Dr. Paul. So Paul, I hand it over to you.
Thank you, Calvin. Appreciate it.
Of course.
All right. I think this topic is really appropriate right now for us to speak about it in this time of year. I'm just going to share my screen here and then we can kind of jump in. I think as the winter months start really taking a toll, things get shorter, things get darker. And of course, there's other things that are going to be contributing to our stress levels. So the whole goal with this Unfiltered Dose webinar series is that we really want to kind of take topics that are going to be appropriate to what people are talking about in the public health forum, what's important to you, and really kind of cut through a lot of the fads and some of the things that might make understanding this topic a little bit more confusing. So I've really kind of looked at this from as a clinician, as a naturopathic doctor, what does a person really need to know? And I've kind of presented some of my favorite things that I like to use with my patients. And I'm just going to work through some of the evidence and some of the rationale behind each one of those. And then we're going to talk about a little bit about some of the top questions that people have. So Calvin will come back on, will help me with that. So Calvin already introduced me. You can see this is a little bit about me. I've been practicing for over 15 years. So let's just kind of set the stage. November, December, things get longer. Here in Canada, you get a time change. Definitely notice that it's a little bit more dark. Get out of work at 5 o'clock and it's already pitch black. So what do we think about during that time? Well, obviously, when we're thinking about the holiday season, we often think of, joy, happiness, peace. But at the same time, there's always the flip side of that where we think about, okay, well, look at all the to-do lists that we have, shopping lists, the hosting of different parties that we might have. And so obviously that brings about stress. And so I definitely notice in my patient population that around this time of year, people get a lot more stressed out and they will tell me that they're even a little bit more depressed. So then there's that begs the question, what drives that? And I kind of want to start off by answering that question. One of the most important things when people are searching for solutions around exactly what we just talked about, the thing that keeps coming back as being the most searched term or group of terms is around, why is my mood low? What is this seasonal affective disorder, or SAD, SAD for short? What about some of the weight changes? I work extensively with people that are trying to lose weight. A lot of people are really concerned around the holidays, where a lot of the benefits that they've tried to get through weight loss programs are starting to be lost. What about energy? Thing I notice right away is that not only is my sleep a little disrupted around that time change, beginning of November, I notice my energy starts going down. And there's some really reasonable things that drive this. Let's try to take a look at that. And ultimately, all three of these things are going to lead to more perception of stress. So let's look at what the difference between feeling a little low and then actually seasonal affective disorder, or SAD, stands for. Really, it comes down to light. So we know that around the time change, November, days get shorter. In fact, the longest day of the year is coming up here in December. You have less light. And when you have less light, you have less melatonin and then serotonin production. Now, melatonin, we'll talk about in just a second. As we know, it's the main hormone that's produced by the pineal gland that regulates your circadian pattern. It regulates your sleep and wake cycle. So it kind of tells your body it's time to sleep. And it also is part of the pathway and creation of the neurotransmitter called serotonin. Now, serotonin does a lot of things throughout the whole body, but it's probably best known for its impact on mood, kind of considered the happiness neurotransmitter. And both melatonin and serotonin levels go down. Well, you might think that's a little counterintuitive. We kind of are a little darker. We want to sleep more. Doesn't that mean that we have more melatonin? Not necessarily. It's because we have less exposure to light, and light really is the key driver. What about actually seasonal affective disorder? We know that Canadians and people that are living in the Northern Hemisphere, about 20% of people get kind of like a little bit lower in mood around this time of year, but that's actually almost like a normal effect. We have less to do outside, so it's our way of our brain kind of maybe decreasing our need to go out and do more. But seasonal affective disorder is actually really in the realm of an actual bona fide mood disorder, and only 2 to 3% of Canadians get that. And that's where you get those depressive symptoms around a specific time of year, specifically around the late fall. And then spring, sun rolls around, more longer days, more lights, and it resolves. And if this keeps happening for more than 2 years, this is kind of the definition of this seasonal affective disorder. And it actually has a lot of overlap with depression. It looks very, very similar, other than really that timing of the year. That's the real big difference. And then ultimately responding to light, being able to use light therapy as a way to reset the circadian pattern and actually increase mood. We'll talk about that in just a moment. But basically, as you can see, contrasted and compared, SAD and depression are very, very similar. It's worth just us noting and stepping back and looking at the importance of light and how it impacts this thing called circadian rhythm. And you can see, I love this graphic because it goes through the entire 24 hours. Let's start here in the morning and start looking at what actually happens. So when your brain starts interpreting light and sun and stimulates some of those wakefulness processes, you can see cortisol, which is our body's stress hormone, starts to increase. And then basically a lot of processes that are responsible for getting energy and mobilizing energy and resources for your body to get about and doing what it needs to do to function during the day, like, for example, insulin, testosterone, alertness, they start to increase. And a lot of this is regulated by light exposure. So think about it this way. If you don't get light exposure, like, for example, if you go right from your bed to the bathroom, to the kitchen, and then right down to your computer, you're really not getting any natural light. And that's going to actually impair the circadian rhythm, because it really is light that is the most powerful synchronizer. Now, The final point I want to make here on this graphic is that everyone kind of understands that, you know what, around this time of year, sleep starts getting disrupted, melatonin production goes down. But really, it's the light timing in the morning, because it's almost like analogous. If you get light in the morning over here around 8, 9, 10 a.m., it's going to help melatonin secretion in the evening. So there's a relationship with light exposure during the day and melatonin secretion at night. So it's not just about maximizing melatonin in darkness, even though you do need darkness for it to properly be secreted. You need the light to actually stimulate that whole process. So what about some other questions? So if you struggle sleeping, what are some things that I ask my patients? And this might actually help you work through some of the issues that you might be having. So for example, do you get tired during the day? If you do, what time do you get tired? Do you get tired in the morning, right away on waking? Do you feel like you get tired in the afternoon? That makes a huge difference on giving you a clue what might be driving it. If you're tired after waking up in the morning, it might be that you're not getting a deep, restful sleep. Maybe a wearable, like for example, an Oura ring, might be helpful in determining, do you get into those deep sleep patterns? Do you have sleep apnea, which is a disruption in breathing in sleep? This is characterized by things like snoring or waking up, and a partner might be helpful in identifying that. Some people don't have that proper cortisol production in the morning, and that actually is reflective of maybe a chronic stress issue. It's actually in the realm of the hormonal sphere. Afternoon fatigue might be determined or indicative of some sort of issue with insulin and blood sugar fluctuations. Maybe the type of diet or food that you're eating at lunch is playing a role there. Maybe it's lack of total sleep and you're able to push through in the morning, and then it starts catching up with you during the day. Are you able to sleep throughout the whole night? Are you being woken up by urination? Really common thing is hot flashes. Are you drinking too much water or another beverage before you go to bed? Is your mind racing? Could be reflective of an anxiety issue. So you can see that, you know, people might present with, I'm tired and I can't sleep, but there's a lot of nuance between figuring out what actually might be driving that. And working with a healthcare provider to help you navigate some of these questions could be really helpful. Do you have difficulty falling asleep? Do you have those racing thoughts? Maybe you're not getting enough light exposure, and that's exactly what we just talked about. What about if you start getting a second wind late at night? That sometimes tells us that there's an adrenal dysfunction, which is our body's stress hormonal system. And then some other disruptors: alcohol, stress, screens, excessive screens, especially late at night, having too many stimulatory activities later at night, like for example, exercise can be disruptive if done at that time. So these are all things that can disrupt a person's sleep. Morning routine is a really important thing to do. And that's why I emphasize in that circadian document or in that circadian graphic, how important it is to get natural light exposure early in the day. In fact, light exposure is important throughout all three phases of the day: the morning, midday, and in the afternoon. In the morning, we want to help our brain get exposed to natural light. It eliminates the residual melatonin in our brain, and it resets our kind of circadian rhythm, saying, hey, this is morning time, so in the evening, melatonin can be produced. In the summer months, during the actual period of 10 to 3 p.m. in the morning, this is when your body can actually get natural vitamin D production by being exposed to sun in a very hygienic way. And then in the evening, exposure to red light and that longer wavelength light, think like sunset. This actually has a beneficial effect on our body's energy production systems. So there's actually benefit on all three phases. Try not to block that light immediately on waking up. Trying to exercise usually earlier in the day is more beneficial. And I just mentioned about some of the things about routines. You can see those points listed here. One of the simplest and most effective things you can do for especially that seasonal affective issue. So if you're feeling down and low mood around that December, November period of time, light exposure during the day, but maybe we won't get that. So obviously sunrise and getting out for a walk, even on cold days, can be helpful on supporting mood. But you can actually use something called a light box or an SAD box. Sometimes it's called a happy light, sometimes it's called a SAD or sad light. And using kind of 15 to 30 minutes of light exposure in the morning on waking at a certain brightness, and most research has been done on 10,000 LUX in the morning, shows that it does have a beneficial effect. So this is actually one of the most efficacious and beneficial things a person can do, and it's actually extremely inexpensive, and it's non-pharmacological. What are some ways that we can increase melatonin? This is your body's natural fall asleep hormone. It does a whole bunch of other things in the body. It starts going up around 8 p.m. A lot of people make the mistake thinking that it is only secreted during the night, but it's actually starting up in the evening. So already at that time, we should be avoiding bright lights, avoiding fluorescent lights, those bright LEDs, especially if you have trouble falling asleep. So sleep hygiene is really, really important. Some foods have a small amount of melatonin, but unfortunately, in my clinical experience, supplementation makes all the difference. And it is not something you have to take forever. And I start with a very low dose of melatonin. I like to use a melatonin spray, for example, and I dose it well before bedtime. If you do it at bed, sometimes if you're going to bed at midnight, you might be missing that melatonin window. So that's something that's really helpful. Some melatonin will lead to people becoming groggy, and that's because it's still in your brain when you're waking up in the morning. And so sometimes capsules or extended release formulations may make that worse. So try maybe something like a sublingual or a drop or a spray earlier in the evening, and that will definitely reduce some of those side effects. Overall, extremely well tolerated supplement and very helpful for initiating sleep. So if you have trouble falling asleep, melatonin has the best evidence. What about vitamin D? We just talked about sun. I really want to make sure I emphasize, because I know a lot of people take vitamin D. It's one of the most common deficiencies that Canadians are experiencing, just simply because we don't naturally make it. And there isn't a lot of great places to get it in food. But sun exposure and light exposure do not equal right away vitamin D. A lot of times people think, oh yeah, you know what? We don't have a sun exposure in the winter months. I'm not getting vitamin D, and that's why depression and mood issues start happening. That's only a piece of the equation. Light itself does a whole bunch more, much more than just vitamin D. So I don't want to limit sunlight exposure just to vitamin D. But as this slide shows, I went ahead and summarized some of the evidence that's present. There's a lot of studies on vitamin D, one of the most well-studied natural health products. And as you can probably imagine, there's some conflicting evidence. Some studies show that there is benefit of supplementing with vitamin D for mood issues. Some show that it doesn't. Overall, I would say after I've reviewed the evidence, the effect is positive. And so in my experience in clinical practice, we test my patients, almost all of them get vitamin D testing at some point in working with me. And if they're deficient, it can lead to a whole host of different issues, including things like experiencing more pain, for example, if levels are deficient, or it could lead to bone issues. We know we need vitamin D for proper bone production. If you're deficient, the research shows that there's 3.5 times greater risk of getting depression. So I think correcting deficiency is one of the first orders of business. And the only way to know that is if you get tested. Just assuming that you live in Canada and take, the Health Canada recommended 1,000 international units may not mean that you are getting enough for your levels. So in my recommendation, get your levels tested. One of the reasons I think that the studies are so all over the place is that there's some studies using small doses, some studies using massive doses, some use injections, some use oral. And so I think that's part of the problem. I think in general, the evidence is weighing towards a benefit with people that are deficient in vitamin D. What about omega-3s? Omega-3s, I talked about magnesium. I talked about, I've talked about vitamin D. We've talked about some melatonin. Omega-3s, I would say, are another foundational things. There's 5 supplements that I consider foundational, and it's the things that almost everybody needs in some way at some point in their life. And so omega-3s are one of them. I mentioned magnesium already, which we will not have a chance to talk about today, but it is really important and does have evidence on having a mood supportive effect. I think vitamin D is definitely in that mix. So that's 3. We're going to talk about probiotics and B vitamins. So those 5 things I think are just absolutely foundational. So I think omega-3s have good evidence for its mood supportive effect. There's so much research, and for the sake of this kind of webinar, I really wanted to focus on some of the high-level takeaways. The takeaway here with omega-3s and mood issues, specifically depression, is that you need to have the high EPA versions. So just general omega-3s doesn't seem like to have a beneficial effect. So again, that's what this particular meta-analysis showed. And the second slide here talks a little bit about just all the studies that they actually did look at. And this is what's called a forest plot. And so you can see there's a little diamond here at the bottom. Anything that's pushed over to the left side means that there's a omega-3 supplementation decreased depression. And you want to not have that cross over that center line. If it's squarely in the left column here, on the left side of that line, that means it does have an overall net positive effect. But you can see a lot of the studies, they do cross the line. And that means that there's still more research that needs to be done. It's not like it's a slam dunk, but overall, the effect is beneficial. I think also there's a note to say about dose. I think if you're getting over 2,000 milligrams of omega-3s, it seems to have a beneficial effect compared to low dose. That's what this 2020 meta-analysis showed. Comparing that to less than 2,000 milligrams did not have as much of a beneficial dose. One of my sneaky favorite herbs is saffron. So I've included this as one of the only herbs in this presentation because I do think it's actually one of those herbs that, while available as a food, as a supplement, it really shows some really fantastic and promising effects. It also has this really broad spectrum effect. It lowers inflammation. It has an antidepressant and a mood enhancing effect. So it's not just a one-trick pony. It does multiple things. It also is extremely safe because it's a food. By the way, eating saffron in your food, as let's say, like for example, your rice, coloring it to give it that really beautiful golden yellow color, it's not going to have a therapeutic effect, but supplementing within it, it actually does. And so there's evidence showing that it improves mood. So some small studies showing about 28 to 30 milligrams of saffron showed an improvement in mood symptoms, especially related to stress and anxiety. So this is really helpful when a person's dealing with kind of those pre-holiday stressors. Those lists just keep getting longer, and you have a lot of things that you're trying to check off. Saffron might be really beneficial. So talk to your healthcare provider about saffron. One additional benefit of saffron is that it also has improvement on sleep. And again, is in as little as 6 weeks, you're going to get improvement in sleep. And that was measured in terms of some sleep questionnaires, duration, latency. And it looks at about 30 milligrams is the best dose. Overall, really well tolerated, but it's often copied. It's often made into adulterated products. So just getting any old saffron off the shelf that you buy online may not be actually therapeutic. So look for a reputable brand that has saffron that has a patented extract, meaning it's coming from, let's say, Spain or another European country that we know that it actually has a lot of the therapeutic ingredients in it. One of my other really favorite ingredients that I use a lot in my practice is the amino acid called L-theanine, which is found in green tea. Now, maybe you've heard of L.
Hey, Dr. Paul, I think we lost your audio there. Just jumping in quick. Yeah. Are you muted? Yeah, we can't hear you. Some technical difficulties. No, I still can't hear. It dropped out maybe about 15 seconds ago. We're just going to have Paul. He's going to try and exit and re-enter. Make sure that his microphone's working.
How's that? Check, check.
Perfect. We're good. All right.
That's weird. I don't know why that happened.
Yeah. Well, hopefully it doesn't happen again. If it
Yeah.
does, I'll
Just
you
let me know. Just let me know if that happens again.
Sounds good.
Sorry about that, everybody. We'll jump right in. Keep talking about L-theanine here. Okay. So L-theanine works really fast. I really like it for people that are experiencing stress and they know that they're going to be experiencing stress, especially at around a certain part of the day. So if, for example, they know their morning routine is really stressful, L-theanine is very helpful when taken and dosed in the morning. It can be dosed with or without food. One of my favorites. Okay, so now let's pivot to one of my, one of the latest things that's been talked a lot about in the research and getting a lot of buzz, and that's the gut-brain axis. And that's what this diagram actually shows. It actually shows this really elegant interaction between our brain, our central nervous system, where, of course, we want to improve stress, we want to improve mood, we want to improve sleep. But then it also shows that our actual gut lining, the cells of our gut, and the immune cells that are in and around our gut, they play a really key role in influencing the central nervous system. And they're going to be producing neurotransmitters. They're going to be producing specific molecules that have an influence on the brain. And then the actual bacteria in our guts themselves and the trillions of bacteria there, they're producing microbial derived active, neuroactive compounds that are not just influencing the gut lining, but also directly influencing the central nervous system. So this is the gut-brain microbiome axis. It really is a huge area of research, and there's a lot of potential here. So I really wanted to just point this out because I know people have heard about it. And I think now we're starting to find ways of leveraging this in terms of helping people feel better and balancing their mood. Just as a quick sidebar to get everybody on the same page, everyone's heard of probiotics before, right? But I just want to make sure that I've highlighted two things that you also might have heard of, but where they kind of fit in. So prebiotics are fibers that are found in food that will help with the fermentation and the growth of bacteria in our gut. So that's different than a probiotic. If maybe a probiotic, we can use the analogy of grass seed. Prebiotics are like fertilizer. So they both have similar effects, but they are very different and they both have unique effects. And then finally, highlighted here in orange, there's a thing called postbiotics. Postbiotics are the products made by bacteria. And you can see here, these are called short chain fatty acids. And there's receptors for these short chain fatty acids throughout the whole body. And they have influence on repair of brain. So I'm in the concussion repair space. I'm in the chronic pain space. Increasing short chain fatty acids is something that is of huge interest to researchers and clinicians because there is a lot of potential and mechanisms on how they can actually help repair the brain. And so you can actually supplement and you can actually use interventions that work on all three of these different levels. So let's actually take a look at a summary of the research. Again, this is another forest plot. And this particular study, very recent, 2023, looked at the effect of prebiotics, probiotics, and symbiotics, which are actually both pre and probiotics, substances that work on both a pre and pro level, showing that they have an overall positive effect on improving mood symptoms. So reducing depression scores, reducing depression symptoms with supplementation with probiotics. Now, there were obviously a couple different pieces of this. More research is needed, but first thing you'll notice is look at the years of the studies, all really recent, 2001, 2021, 2019, 2022. So the research around this is exploding. Researchers are still trying to figure out who would best benefit from it, what particular strains would be best benefit mood, but we're starting to understand that a little bit, but we don't fully know that totally. And so there's a lot more evidence that's needed. So there also may be a difference between males and females and how they respond to it. Maybe males respond a little bit better, as may be indicated by this particular meta-analysis. The term psychobiotic is another way to describe a probiotic that has a brain or mood benefit. And you can see this particular 2024 review paper does a really good job at summarizing some of this. And you can actually take a look. Like, for example, this graphic, this chart actually highlights this is the exact probiotic. So Bifidobacterium longum, so that's the species. It tells you the dose, so a very large amount. And it tells you what they found. And they found that there was reduced stress symptoms and improved memory. That's actually quite promising. So overall, what we can say about probiotics is that while it may not be something that you feel or notice, the subtle and under the surface effect is that probiotics decrease the effect of stress on your gut. So it makes your gut less permeable. It makes your gut less changeable after having being under the influence of stress. It also may have some positive effects on certain neurotransmitters like serotonin, for example, which we know is primarily produced in the gut. So it makes sense that probiotics actually may help that. And then finally, it may improve overall stress scores. So you can see improved, like for example, lower mood states, improve anxiety, improve sleep quality. These are kind of like general things. So we're still trying to really nail down, but I'm really excited about looking at this as it evolves in the future. There's a really recent study. This is a meta-analysis that looked at a whole bunch of different studies in adults, looking at prebiotics, probiotics, and symbiotics for adults with major depressive disorder. And they found that probiotics had a similar effect. So probiotic supplementation had a similar effect to almost all of the antidepressants that were also looked at in the study. This is shocking. When I saw this, I couldn't believe it. Really, there was only one antidepressant that had an effect that was even better than probiotics. But overall, it seems like there's a very promising effect. So I think that we can really look at especially more research that's coming out. Probiotics are going to play a huge role. So I do think that that's really important to keep as part of the mix. What about diet? Let's kind of pivot because, as a naturopathic doctor, I really make sure that I emphasize kind of a full diet, exercise, lifestyle approach. Supplements play a key role that we can use in strategic situations, but ultimately we want to make sure that food is our medicine, just like Hippocrates, the father of modern medicine, stated thousands of years ago. So I just want to give you a sneak peek, because again, I could probably do a 3-hour presentation on the influence of mood and a diet on mood. That's not the scope of this Unfiltered Dose podcast. I really want to focus on one thing. And so this is one thing that I think makes sense, that gives us a good idea about tying in everything we've talked about together. Let's talk about blueberries. When you think about a health food and you were to poll maybe 50 people, I bet you blueberries would be one of the top things that people would say is kind of a brain beneficial food. And so this particular study in 2020 looked at all the brain interventions on cognitive performance and mood. And they found that 8 out of 12 studies that they looked at show that there was an improvement in measures of cognitive performance, specifically short-term and long-term memory and spatial memory. And let's take a little bit of a deeper look. So the main ingredient that's in blueberries, these are called flavonoids. What they found in this study is that the flavonoids were converted by the gut bacteria and metabolized in order to increase absorption. So what happens is the gut bacteria plays a key role in absorbing and using the foods that we eat. So, for example, eat blueberries, you're going to have the gut bacteria work on the flavonoids, and that's going to help absorption. It's also going to help the gut bacteria get more diverse, which is also going to be helpful. So the impact is improving the gut, which we know, we just talked about, has a beneficial effect on your brain. And then finally, tying in the full kind of lifestyle is that they also found that when they looked at people that exercised after consuming blueberries, found that they had a much improved level of flavonoids actually in their bloodstream. That means that not only is the gut bacteria playing a key role in helping absorption, they're also helping themselves and improving their diversity, but also our lifestyle, specifically around exercise, helps improve getting it into our body. So there's this beautiful and elegant synergy between diet, gut bacteria, gut-brain axis, and then getting it into the bloodstream. So for example, people that ate blueberries, and in this particular, it was like they consumed a blueberry-rich juice, went for a run, found that the levels were by far higher than those that just basically drank the blueberry juice and sat around and did nothing. In fact, those levels actually went down. So this to me is fascinating and really talks about the synergy. Now, one final point about fruit and blueberries. Some people think about blueberries as, really beneficial things, but then some are skeptical because they're like, well, what about Dr. Paul, the sugar that's in the fruit? And this particular study actually looked at that too. And they found that the sugar that was found in the fruit did not have a detrimental effect. It seems like sugar that's found in fruit and naturally occurring fruits and plants and vegetables does not have the same detrimental effect that processed added cane sugar or high fructose corn syrup has. So back to the whole holiday food issue. So if you have a choice around the holidays, opt for foods that are naturally sugar, that have natural sugar, that don't have added sugar. That is the best way to decrease the negative impact. So blueberries, beneficial effect, but really have a gut-brain impact. What about exercise? Again, synergistic with blueberries. What about itself? And I would probably say exercise probably has one of the strongest benefits, even better than antidepressants. There's lots and lots of evidence. You can see there's SSRIs right here. So this is the main class of antidepressants. This visual abstract from the British Medical Journal is fantastic, looking at, again, this network meta-analysis of randomized controlled trials. Exercise plus antidepressants was way better than just antidepressants. And then exercise itself, whether walking, jogging, cognitive behavioral therapy, it's on par or even better than cognitive behavioral therapy. It seems like when you dive into this particular study and similar studies, the effect for exercise is to do with you do want to have a good intensity. So just going for just some sort of like really light walk is not going to be as strong, even though walking does have a very beneficial effect. There's also a duration piece. So again, aiming for about 3 hours a week of moderate intensity exercise is ideal. And then other types of exercise like dancing, strength training, yoga. So variety does play a role. So I think that there's also beneficial effects in that. So it's not just one type of exercise. It seems like a mixed exercise, making sure you're getting strength, making sure you're getting the intensity up. And then I just want to conclude just by talking about some other natural options that I just didn't have time to talk about in this episode of the Unfiltered Dose. B vitamins, there's evidence on if you're deficient in B12, B6, B2, B1, folic acid, you're going to have a more propensity to have a decreased mood. Same with magnesium. Magnesium, one of my favorite natural minerals because of its impact on so many different functions. There's evidence for magnesium on improving depression, but also improving chronic pain, decreasing the perception of stress with tight, tense muscles. It may help improve sleep when some people are experiencing some of those pain issues in the evening. Most people don't have enough magnesium because you're not finding enough in your diet. I talked about L-theanine already. 5-HTP and tryptophan, this one I included on the list because it's commonly found in that aisle of the natural health product section of your store. I don't find it works that great, to be honest. We think, turkey is high in tryptophan. That's why we sleep after Thanksgiving and Christmas dinner. That's not the case. That's a myth that's been debunked. It's not that turkey has any higher level of tryptophan than any other proteins. It's really just the insulin spike of overeating and getting that big sugar spike in your bloodstream. And then there's some other herbs like St. John's wort, valerian, passion flower that all have some calming and mood supportive effects. Don't have a chance to talk about those, but they do have some evidence for it. So of course, everything I've talked about gives you kind of my favorites, but you always have to talk about this with your healthcare provider. And I always talk about talking with a supplement literate healthcare provider. That might be your pharmacist, might be your medical doctor, but most likely it's your naturopathic doctor that's going to help guide you. There obviously always is interactions with medications. You have to be very careful. I mentioned things like theanine and saffron. The evidence shows that they don't have a ton of interactions. That's a pro, but always be careful when you're adding in natural health products. So I think we can kind of turn over back to Calvin and try to tie some of this together with some of the top questions that we're asking, and people are asking me, and hopefully we can answer some of those. But let's get right into that, and hopefully we can come up with some of the ideal strategies. And what I presented so far gives you, I think, a good start on beating some of those winter blues.
Yeah. Now that we've covered kind of the main content, I think it's a great time to jump into some Q&A. So this is your chance, if you're in chat right now, to ask Dr. Hrkal anything related to winter mood support, supplements, or other topics we discussed today. If you didn't submit a question yesterday, you can do so right now. But yeah, if you're ready, Dr. Hrkal, we can just start jumping into some questions. Sure. So some of this stuff, because they were submitted yesterday, are things that you discussed in the presentation, but I think it's still important to kind of go over it.
Sure.
Again, so we have a question here. Why do people feel more down and depressed this time of year?
Yeah, I think just in summary, good way to conclude is I think that it's a combination of lack of sunlight. It comes down to that. And that leads to lower levels of melatonin and serotonin. And that leads to sleep disruption. That also leads to mood disruption. And so that can be combated by increasing some natural light exposure, whether it's through one of those happy lights or getting out and going for a walk, even if it's cold outside, to get that natural light in your eyes early in the morning. That early morning light, Calvin, really makes a big difference on supporting that. I think exercise is a great way to do it. So I'll give you my personal hack. I have an exercise bike that I do. I do workout most mornings. And then I have literally a light box there on a little table right beside.
Perfect.
And I just, while I'm on that bike, I do a little bit of cardio before I go into strength training, and have that light box is on. Great way to combat that. Has made a big difference for me.
Nice. Okay. So like supplementing with vitamin D alone just isn't enough.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. I think most people think like, oh yeah, I'm getting kind of sad in the winter, I'm just going to start pumping vitamin D. I mean, in my experience and what I presented here really quickly is I don't think that's going to make a huge difference unless you're really deficient. And then maybe you can start noticing that. Like, that being said, I think making sure we have adequate levels of vitamin D is helpful, but it doesn't replace the sunlight. That's the main takeaway.
I think that's definitely important. Okay, another question we have here are, what are some subtle signs that I might be heading towards the winter blues that I might not recognize?
Yeah. So I think that, that little comparison chart that I showed there, if we want to think back to that, if you're starting to notice that, and I've seen it with patients, like their mood, their feeling of happiness, motivation, and energy drops off a cliff in November. It seems like that's like the big piece that they'll notice. And so they'll say that, I just don't feel like working out anymore. I feel like I just can't get out of bed. I'm just dragging myself all the time. These are all kind of the obvious, and then even some subtle signs around it. So I think if you're noticing that your personality and the way that you're interacting with your normal things starts changing, that's a bit of a red flag. People around you start sharing that. It's normal for people to kind of have a little bit more of a subdued mood because of the shorter days around this time of year, but it shouldn't start impacting your ability to get through the day and your quality of life and some of those more main things. That's how you know you're kind of going in the wrong direction and you start looking for some help.
That's fair. Yeah, when it starts to get disruptive.
That's right.
I have a question live in chat here. It says, do you have any specific advice for older adults who are experiencing dementia?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think actually, to be perfectly honest, this is a great presentation for that, because all the things that I talked about today have benefits also on brain function and also on both prevention and maintenance of cognitive function as a person ages. So like, for example, let me just highlight a couple. We know that as people get older, they get into the 6th, 7th decade of their lives, their sleep starts becoming dysfunctional. They sleep less. So looking at ways to preserve that with natural light exposure. The other thing that we also know is melatonin starts going down. Magnesium levels start going down. Absorption of nutrients like B vitamins and vitamin D start going down. So, I mean, I think the simplest thing to answer the question in chat is make sure that you're not deficient in any of the things that we highlighted today. Specifically, what can be tested is B vitamins through B12 levels, vitamin D can be tested. So making sure you have all the right building blocks. And then you start looking at optimizing. And so, which is your main issue? Is there sleep issues? Are there other memory issues? Maybe I'm not exercising as much. Exercise is one of the most powerful ways to preserve our brain, because it increases a lot of those nerve-derived neurotropic factors, those things that increase brain function. Saffron has been studied, even head-to-head, some Alzheimer's drugs showing some initial promise. I didn't highlight that study, but that study does exist. You can take a look at that. So that would be a fantastic thing to consider and look at. So I think that there's a lot that we talked about today that can be applicable. And finally, I shouldn't forget omega-3s, and especially, unlike the mood one, the DHA version is going to be the one that is more brain specific. I do use that in my clinical practice, and that can be quite helpful.
Brilliant. Perfect. We have another question here from chat. They're looking for recommendations on light source products, because there seems to be a lot of kind of poor quality or ineffective ones out there. So maybe like what kind of details should they look for in like a good light source product?
Yeah, that's a good question. Like, I think that ultimately sometimes we're going to pay for what we get. So if we go online and just find out, the cheapest, Asian knockoff of some of the ones that I think that you're going to maybe not get the reliability. I think what you're first of all looking for here is going to be, is the light box able to get up to that 10,000 LUX? If it states that, and it says it's, full spectrum light is what we're looking for, then those are good signs. I don't have any specific brands that I would say like this is, absolutely what I'd recommend. But, I also, what I didn't have a chance to talk about is red light therapy, which is one of the, really one of those up and coming things. A lot of, I would say, information and even misinformation out there above that. That also has a whole host of beneficial effects. And again, you kind of are looking for reputable brands. And again, we can't list them all here right now, but I use the Kala Light, Kala. I have no affiliation with them, but that's one that I think goes in, and when you look at the actual specifics, it does get into those, like 680 nanomole, like wavelength. That's beyond the scope of this particular conversation, but I think you have to really try to get it from good quality sources. Another way, like sometimes, like I got my Happy Light from Costco, and again, no affiliation there, but I know that Costco generally screens their products pretty well. And that's another way of just double checking, the quality is decent, and a company like that's going to stand behind it. So that's one little simple way of maybe double checking that.
I like that. And we're going to be afterwards sharing the recording of this, as well as maybe adding some resources. So we could probably put like a little list together of like the minimums that you should be kind of going for when looking for a quality product. We can include that. Another question we have is, how can I boost my energy and motivation during the winter?
Yeah. So I think doing the, first of all, making sure that you have a morning light and an exercise routine is an absolute must. And I think that's one of the best ways just to kind of get going. A lot of times people notice they're way more active in the summer because they just want to go outside. And ultimately, what are you getting when you're going outside? You're getting light and you're moving your body. So try to maintain that. After that, I think one of my favorite things is electrolytes and B vitamins. Two things that I haven't really talked about today, but actually, if energy is a real issue, those are some of the best things that help support the body's own energy production pathways. The mitochondria, the actual cells, the power plants inside of our cells, and that's how we ultimately will get more energy. So I think that's probably the best way. If you have any deficiencies, sometimes in the winter, they kind of get a little bit worse because, your overall energy production goes down. So if you are borderline iron deficient, or you have any sort of gut issues like IBS, sometimes absorption, Calvin, can be a problem. So just going and getting your blood tested to really check out what might be happening, that is one way to prevent that and optimize energy.
Okay. And you can just do that by talking to your ND, correct?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, if you have good energy, that's overall a great litmus test that your body's mitochondria are functioning well. we know that after a flu, you get tired. Why?
Mhm.
Well, the body wants to slow you down and recover and put resources towards your immune system. And if you if you start getting exercise, start moving your body, getting back to your routine, that energy gets better even after it's been suppressed there by a virus.
That's great. That's good. Okay, I have a question. I actually have a few questions here. I might group them together.
Sure.
They have, what kind of tips can you give me to prevent me from overindulging during the holidays? And
Yeah.
then also, how can I lose weight after the holidays quickly?
Oh man. Oh man. Yeah. So, we're actually going to be doing a really great webinar coming up in January all about weight loss. And so we're going to
Okay.
talk all about that. So I'm not going to steal that thunder too much, but I think
Yep.
that it's reasonable to say, and I think this is what I try to highlight with that blueberry study, is saying like try to eat as whole food as possible. That's not to say you can't enjoy yourself, but I think that at some point, if you are really serious about maintaining body composition, you can't go and write off 3 or 4 weeks of holiday cookie indulgence and going off the
Mhm.
wagon. Because what we know, Calvin, is that once you start introducing sugary foods into your diet, your brain's going to ask for more. And that's where you start getting things like cravings. And so when you
Yeah.
start letting some of that stuff in, it causes more and more and more. So it's easy to kind of
The
like,
snowball, the
yeah,
spiral. Yeah, we've all
easy
felt
to
it.
fall off the wagon. So I would say like really try to prevent that from even starting. And then, just try to pick as much whole foods as possible. And every dinner, every Christmas dinner, there's always options you can choose that are minimally processed. So like proteins and vegetables, prioritize those two things
Yeah.
without trying to staying away from like really the empty carbs and calories.
Yeah. Yeah. The blueberries can sub for a great dessert, right?
I do use that actually quite a bit myself,
Mhm.
I'll be honest. And yes, I know that like that cake is super tempting, but it's going to make it harder for you to achieve those goals.
Fair. Yeah. Maybe we can wrap it up. We got one more question here
Sure.
that I think kind of can summarize the entire thing is, what does an ideal winter supportive daily routine look like for you?
Yeah. Okay. So let's walk through it. I think everything what I mentioned today it plays a role. So first of all, am I getting some sort of physical activity at some point in a winter month? So am I being active in the gym? Am I doing things at home? You do not have to spend a ton of money to do this. You do have to still move your body. Still try to get natural light during the day, whether you go for a walk in the mornings, whether you are exposed to the happy light. I do think, especially if you're struggling with mood, light hygiene matches sleep hygiene at night. If you're struggling with sleep, you got to get the movement and you got to get the light during the day. So that would be, I think, the ideal routine from lifestyle. That I'm
Mhm.
assuming that a person's diet is not going to be full of ultra processed foods. That's going to obviously impair all the things we're trying to do.
Of course. Yeah.
So I mean, I think we'll just stick to that lifestyle, and then from there, strategically supplement. If you are somebody that struggles with sleep, maybe you consider magnesium and melatonin and something like L-theanine. If you struggle with mood issues and anxiety, maybe it's L-theanine and saffron. If you're struggling with energy issues, maybe you're optimizing your vitamin D. I think you can make a case that you could use omega-3s with everything I just mentioned because of how wide the benefit on omega-3s are. We didn't even talk about things like inflammation, but there's a whole line of research looking at depression and mood issues as
Mhm.
an inflammatory issue. So that's one of the reasons or the theories why omega-3s that are high in EPA
Mhm.
are antidepressive because they have an anti-inflammatory effect. So I
Mhm.
think there's that angle that's really important to understand. And so I think that would be, the light and sleep routine, the movement
Mhm.
routine. That's my ideal kind of, I would say, beat the holiday stress routine. Don't fall into the trap of like, I'm just going to do whatever for a month and then hopefully I can like pull it out of a
Crawl out of that
nosedive
hole. Yeah.
in January. That's always so much harder. It's so much easier when you're like, okay, you know what? I indulged a little bit, but I didn't go so far that I'm not able to I got off like, the plan I needed. But
Mhm.
really the message I wanted to share here today is like the sleep and wake cycle. Really respect that in your life.
Perfect. Yeah, no, thank you so much, Dr. Hrkal, for, sharing clear, practical, and science-backed insights with us today. I want to thank everyone who joined us. Your engagement, your questions, participation kind of made this session incredibly valuable. We hope you're leaving with a better understanding of how to support your mood and overall wellness during these winter months, and with strategies that you can start using right away. If you'd like to revisit anything from today, I did mention it before, but we'll be sending out a recording of the webinar along with a few helpful resources. If you have any additional questions, you can always reach out, send us an email. We're always happy to help. So on behalf of Aqua Mega team, thank you again for spending part of your day with us. Stay well, stay warm, and we hope to see you guys in the next webinar.
Hey, everybody.
Thanks again.